Welcome to the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, woodworking with an Appalachian flair.
This is Jerill Vance with the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, and I want to show you a little exercise that I created for my students to improve their hand cutting dovetail ability. I developed this when I was teaching woodworking to some prison inmates in the state of Kentucky. It works really good. There are three different steps to this: a beginner woodworker, intermediate woodworker, and an advanced woodworker. So you pick out whichever one you think you are and start there. And there's nothing wrong with doing all three, or starting with the intermediate and doing the intermediate and advanced at the same time. It doesn't matter. This exercise, or these three exercises, will help you hone your dovetail cutting skills by improving 5 different areas. They will ensure that you are able to cut a straight and a square line. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, when dovetails, you cut an angled line. It is true, you cut an angled line, but the line is still straight. From point A to point B has to be straight. If the line is wavy or arced, then your dovetails will not fit together tight. So you have to be able to cut a straight line, and of course that straight line can be on an angle, but it must be straight. And of course square is a big advantage also. So this exercise will help you improve that. It will also reduce your margin of error. Now that sounds kind of odd, but you need every advantage you can when you're hand cutting dovetails. So the best way to explain it is to think like a professional athlete. A professional athlete, a Major League Baseball player, when they are called up on deck, it used to be they would take 2 or 3 bats and they would practice swinging 2 or 3 bats. Well, they've since done away with that, and they've created a device called a donut, which slips over the bat and it weights the end of the bat. So now they have one bat that is heavier on the end than the bat they use during the game, and they practice with the heavy bat. A professional basketball player will practice with leg weights or ankle weights on, so they get used to jumping with extra weight on. So when they take the weights off, they can jump higher, quicker, faster. So in a game time, they're better. A track sprint athlete will practice with a device, a harness with a parachute drag on. So that forces him to lean forward, and it gives him more resistance. So when he takes that off, he has better form and less drag, so he can run faster. So as a woodworker, you need to reduce your margin of error. And the way you do that, whatever is the normal thickness that you use when you cut dovetails, such as 3/4 of an inch, then you practice with 1 inch. If you normally cut dovetails in 1.5 inch thick material, then you practice with 2 inch. Okay? So that's the way we'll be doing this. For today, we're going to be using 1/2 inch, and I recommend you start with 1/2 inch and work your way up. Another way this improves your hand cutting dovetail ability, it familiarizes you with the units of measure that you use. Now, if you use millimeters, then you become more familiar with millimeters. If you use inches, you become more familiar with that. Again, the best way to comprehend this is to think of a mechanic. A mechanic can look at a nut or a bolt and at a very quick glance immediately tell you that's 7/16, or that's 9/16, or that's 13 millimeters. They know, and that's from experience and from use. So as a woodworker, instead of continually relying on a ruler, you need to develop and hone your skill of being able to determine a specific size without a use of measurement. And that helps you in dovetails because it helps you cut them much faster, and if you want to cut them symmetrical or non-symmetrical, it's much easier that way. Another way this helps you improve your dovetail cutting skills is it allows you to see your improvement. These exercises are designed to be done on a regular basis. If you're a professional woodworker or a retired individual and you can go into the shop every day, then you go into the shop, conduct these exercises, which at first will take about 5 to 7 minutes, and after you've done them a few times, it'll take 3 to 5 minutes a day. After about 2 weeks, you can visually see your difference because you will have a history, you will have a record to look back on. You'll be able to look at what you cut on day 1, 2, or 3 and compare that to what you cut on day 10, 11, or 12, and you can visually see the difference. Another way this helps you in cutting your dovetails, it allows you to set a PR. That is a personal record. Most athletes, whatever their sport, they have a personal record. So instead of continually trying to beat the other athlete, they're pushing themselves to be better than they were the last time they competed. So as a woodworker, you need to think of it the same way. Don't compare your dovetails to a video. Don't compare your dovetails to a magazine. Don't compare your dovetails to the neighbor down the road. Compare your dovetails to your previous dovetails. Always improving. And if you're always improving, always challenging yourself, then you'll see the improvement. And I've come up with a way of being able to measure that so it is not subjective. It is a way of measuring it and being able to say, this is my personal record, and then you continually try to beat that. So those are the 5 ways that you'll be able to improve your hand cutting dovetails by doing these exercises. Again, there's 3 exercises, one for the beginner, one for the intermediate, and one for the advanced, okay? So now let's look at each one individually. Okay, we're going to start with the exercise for the beginning woodworker. There's nothing wrong with trying this exercise if you're an intermediate or advanced. Try it. It doesn't take you long to do this. It doesn't take you long to perfect this if you have good woodworking skills, and then move on up to the intermediate or the advanced. And there's nothing wrong with doing the beginner and the intermediate at the same time, or the intermediate and the advanced at the same time. I would caution jumping from the beginner to the advanced though. Again, we're going to start with a piece of hardwood, close-grained hardwood, fairly thin. This is a 1/2 inch thick. For the beginner, start with thin because it's a little bit easier to work with, and then slowly progress on the thickness. Now for the beginner woodworker, what you need to do is draw a line that is square down and across the edge also, the top of it. And here you can see I've got 3 lines, and then I've drawn a depth line down at the bottom. When you lay out dovetails, you'll have these lines on your board. So now what you want to do is practice cutting down these lines. You don't want to stray from the line. You want to go straight down the line to the bottom where the cross line is, and don't go beyond that. It's very critical. Now when you're doing this, what you need to concentrate on is your form. Your form of cutting is very important. So your stance, you need to have your stance. If you're predominantly right-handed, like I am, then your right leg will be slightly back and your left leg slightly forward. That gives you a nice balance. You want your hand to grip the saw. You want your index finger to point out the saw the same way you're going to be going. Get a good grip on it. You want your wrist to be straight, your arm to be straight with your elbow, and from elbow shoulder to be straight. All of this is in one line. So when you're moving, it's like a pendulum moving straight back. If your wrist is bent or your elbow is bent, you're going to be moving in all different directions and you're not going to be able to cut a straight line. So the most important is to get lined up so you're going in a straight line, much like a linkage on a locomotive train, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut down this line. First you want to score it, so you put it on the edge, the corner edge of the board, and you pull back. Now I want to say this is with a Western saw. I've used a Western saw quite a bit. If you're using a Japanese saw, then it's just the opposite. The Western saw cuts on the push stroke. The Japanese saw cuts on the pull stroke. So when you start just the opposite. So with a Western saw, you start or score your line by coming backwards. And with the Japanese saw, you would score your line by going forward. So put this on there and you slowly come back. Again, you're watching the line on the face of the board and the edge of the board. And what you want to do is cut right down that line, all the way down to the bottom without going below the bottom. Now you also need to pay attention to the resistance or the drag or the friction on the saw. As you're cutting this, the saw is designed to clear the sawdust out. The teeth are set slightly wider than the blade of the saw. So in theory, the blade of the saw is not going to be binding up. But if you're not cutting a straight line, it will bind and you will feel it. So you need to pay attention to that. If you feel any resistance, any binding, then something is not right. Either you're cutting a line that is not straight or your motion is not straight. Okay, so once you've cut that one, come over to the other one. Again, score your line, paying attention to the line on the back side. I'm sorry, paying attention to the line on the front side. The front of the board is towards me, the back of the board is towards the camera. Cut all the way down to the line and no further. And then you do the same thing over here. Again, paying attention to the line. And that's all there is to it. Now you want to examine it. This, which is the front side, as you can see, I cut right down the line. This one I stopped a little short, so that one right there is not very good. Turn it over, cut right down the line. This one right here is a little short. That one's perfect. This one's a little short also. Then you look to see that these are square. They'd be on the line. And once you've done this and you feel confident and you've done this with acceptable results, then you move up to the intermediate. Now, you can continue doing this. If you want to go in between those, like that, and go, then it's perfectly fine. So once you've done this a few times, again, take it, write the date on here, cut it off, set that aside, you have a record. So after 2 weeks, you can look and see what you cut on day 1, what you cut on day 14, and compare them, and you'll be able to see your improvement. Once you've mastered this, step up to the intermediate and begin that.